Now, getting into our first segment of the day and the trade between the Bills and the Texans, sending star wide receiver Stefon Diggs on his way to Houston. Adam Schefter of ESPN broke the news this morning. The full deal is that the Texans are trading a 2025 second round pick that is actually initially from Minnesota in return for Stefon Diggs, a 2024 sixth rounder, and a 2025 fifth rounder. We're going to start with the perspective on the Bills here and sort of lead the Texans and CJ Stroud thoughts into the second segment. But for the Bills here, I'm not massively surprised that Stefon Diggs is out of Buffalo. This has been something that has really been brewing over the past couple seasons. Rumblings of Diggs being upset with the organization for some time now. Really, we saw it last year pop up following the loss to the Cincinnati Bengals in the divisional round, where during that game there was the clip that sort of went viral of Stefon Diggs yelling at Josh Allen on the sidelines. And then after that, there were a handful of stories that were coming out for the next few months, really, up into the summer, about how he was angry with the Bills and seemed like he had lost some faith in the organization. And he was also frustrated with Josh Allen himself, seemingly because of the usage with Diggs, which I'll sort of dive into as we go on here. But if you look at that Bengals game, where at the time Diggs was coming off a season with 1,400 yards and was really not that he isn't now, but of course one of the legitimate top best receivers in the NFL. In this game against the Bengals, in a big moment, he was targeted 10 times but only had 4 catches for 35 yards. And that sort of foreshadowed the year that was to come for Diggs and the Bills headed into the 2023 season, where this past year, it wasn't for lack of trying to get Diggs involved. He had 160 targets this past year, which was tied for the 6th most in the NFL. He finished with 1,183 yards, so still very solid. That marked 13th in the NFL in terms of receiving yards, but he really tailed off down the stretch of the season, and just the final stretch of the season is probably underselling it some. He didn't surpass 100 yards in a game after week 6 last year, and again, not for lack of trying. He was targeted more than 10 times in 4 of those last 11 games. He was never targeted less than 5 times, and yet they just weren't able to necessarily get on the same page. And of course, sort of notable that this was when the Bills were trying to make this playoff push after starting 500 through the first half of the season. Just about every game was, in a way, win or go home for them, or they wouldn't make the playoffs. And truthfully, just from an eye test, I sort of thought that the Bills' offense looked better when Josh Allen was looking to spread the ball around a little bit more, not going for those massive chunk plays that we've seen from them in times that really, if you go back to that Bengals game, I feel like that's what was hurting them. Is this hasn't been an offense that has necessarily been great at methodically driving, and a lot of that sort of stems from the fact that the expectation is that they run a lot of these home run plays, and Diggs, along with Gabe Davis as well, and they were definitely missing him in the playoffs this past year, but just sort of forcing those two guys for the big plays. Now, they actually developed a run game this past season, so with James Cook, so that was a development that sort of took away a little bit from featuring Diggs quite as much. And ultimately, again, it's not that the Bills were completely taking Diggs out of the picture. It was just really ineffective down the second half of the season, and in the playoffs it was a lot of the same, where he had 15 targets, 10 catches, so even a better sort of completion rate there than we had seen from the regular season, but just 73 yards between those two games. And The Bills knew they were going to have to make some changes coming into this offseason. They were attempting to cut costs. They did so with some players that were under contract already, such as Jordan Poyer and Tre'Davious White, releasing both of them, two staples of their defense since 2017. They also let some other free agents walk, such as Mitch Morse and Gabe Davis. As far as this Diggs move specifically, I don't believe that it is a devastating blow for the Bills. If they don't end up winning a Super Bowl in any of the next few seasons, it won't be because they don't have Diggs, who was tremendous for the development of Josh Allen during his first couple years. And I'm sure that Stefon Diggs, if you have been paying attention to social media at all, he definitely feels a little differently, where he had responded to a post yesterday about the idea of Josh Allen being able to operate without the likes of Diggs. There was a tweet that came out that's in reference to Josh Allen saying, "Does Josh benefit from having a top-tier receiver? Yes. Is he essential to his success? No." And Diggs responded to that with just a two-word question, "You sure?" So I guess now we are going to put that to the test a little bit. Diggs clearly, again, a little bit of shade at Allen. Obviously, Diggs is more prideful in himself, talking about how good he is. But in that same light, he's saying that Josh Allen is not the same level of successful without Stefon Diggs. And I do think that, again, the term essential, saying that that's the case, I just don't think I agree with at this point, because again, I thought that the Bills offense actually looked a little bit smoother when they weren't trying to force feed Diggs over and over. And ultimately, we'll see how this all plays out, because as things currently stand, the Bills are definitely lacking a little bit in the receiver department after now trading Diggs, and they also let Gabe Davis walk in free agency. So their top three receivers at the moment are Curtis Samuel, who they just signed in free agency this past offseason, Khalil Shakir, who was a nice developmental piece for them over the course of the season, and Mac Hollins, who they brought in from Atlanta as well. So not exactly an extremely star-studded receiver group. I do think they have one of the best 1-2 punches in terms of tight ends in the league. Dawson Knox, I feel like, has been criminally underrated, that is, over the past couple years. And the addition of Dalton Kincaid, we saw the flashes from him. He is a big-time piece for them. So it's not like their offense is completely without weapons. Like I mentioned, they just added a run game, really, for the first time since Josh Allen has been there this past year with the type of season that James Cook has. We'll see what types of success they're able to replicate with that. But when you talk about the Bills' issues here, I do think that this isn't so much on Josh Allen, and I don't love Sean McDermott either necessarily as a head coach. He has helped them be very successful in the regular season, so I wouldn't say he's a bad coach by any means. And he did that even before Josh Allen came to the Bills, where it was Tyrod Taylor leading the playoff push for Buffalo. But I think the number one person that sort of should be getting some blame in all of this as to why they haven't had the success that we were necessarily expecting them to is their general manager, Brandon Beane. They brought him in May of 2017, and since then, it hasn't been a very successful period of drafting new players, where Josh Allen has been the only player on the team that they drafted that has made an all-pro team. They actually took Wyatt Teller, the Pro Bowl guard, and a couple all-pro second-team appearances for Cleveland in that same draft as Josh Allen, but they let him go, and Teller's had a very successful career for himself elsewhere, but don't really give that credit to Buffalo in that sense. And is important to note, Brandon Beane was brought in after Tre'Davious White and Matt Milano were drafted in that 2017 class. Before, when I was doing this, I was even giving him some credit for that, but if you actually look at the timeline, he did not officially have the job when White and Milano were brought in, so he doesn't even really get credit for that in my eyes. But now here on the Texans, they have done an incredible job of putting together a roster that is looking to contend for a Super Bowl, where we saw them have this little bit of an unexpected jump last season, and they make the playoffs, they win a playoff game, and now they understand that with the type of season that their rookie quarterback in CJ Stroud had, they can, and not just that they can, but they should try and go out and spend in these next few seasons before they end up having to give him a big time contract extension. We saw the types of additions that they made on the defensive side of the ball, specifically in Danielle Hunter, Azeez Al-Shaair, and Danico Autry. Jeff Okudah, again, I sort of throw him in there as well. He's at least got a name, a former, I think he was 3rd overall a few drafts ago, but has been disappointing up to this point. But if you are a believer in him, he could end up being a very legitimate corner. Doesn't have to be the number 1, because Derek Stingley, I think that he's somebody that, probably because of the fact that Sauce Gardner was in the same draft class as him, the Jets market versus the Texans market, especially in that year, their rookie season in 2022, where the Texans were not necessarily any form of a big brand themselves, that Stingley is a pretty underrated cornerback in terms of public perception of him as well. And they already beefed up their defense to a next level. I think that, we've seen D'Amico Ryans, their rookie head coach from last season. He is an incredible defensive mind. That's why he was so successful as a linebacker during his playing career. And their offensive coordinator, and Bobby Slowick, did a really good job of helping Stroud come along last season. And now he just has one extra tool to add alongside the other variety of good players that they had last season. Obviously, Tank Dell had a nice rookie year for himself before he ended up getting injured. Nico Collins had a breakout season as well. They went and brought back Dalton Schultz. So plenty of pieces there for Houston, and the fact that they just brought in Joe Mixon as well. Devin Singletary was good down the stretch of last season as well, but Joe Mixon, I believe, is an upgrade at that position as well. I still feel like when you look at that game against Baltimore, really they lost the battle in the trenches on both sides of the ball, which is why CJ Stroud was running around for his life, and that was an incredibly talented Baltimore defense, it should be noted, and their offensive line was solid as well, but the Texans, that is, they beef up in the trenches on defense. The offensive side is maybe the one thing I'm not totally sold on, but still I feel like there's just tons of pieces for the Texans be able to roll out next year and show that they weren't just a one-year fluke. I haven't looked at the updated lines actually, but when I did my segment on reacting to the win lines that were released by DraftKings Sportsbook, I believe I did that. It was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. The Texans were at 9.5, which I thought was just about the perfect line at the time. I'm not saying that Diggs automatically catapults them over that. A lot of this is going to fall onto the shoulders of CJ Stroud headed into his second season, having the opposing coaches, especially in that AFC South, that should prove to be, sneakily competitive, I think, in my eyes, having them be able to spend this whole offseason finding out his tendencies, trying to capitalize on how can we throw him off his game. Will CJ Stroud have a sophomore slump? That is something we will be discussing in the next segment, talking about the second-year quarterbacks as a whole and what types of expectations we should be holding them to for next year. So we're going to be taking our first break here, and when we come back on the other side, we will be diving into that. So stick with us. We will be right back.